If you're a fan of Rush, I think you're really going to love what I have for you today. And when I say a fan of Rush, I'm not just talking about somebody like, yeah, I like Tom Sawyer and Moving Pictures. I'm talking about somebody that goes back, that knows what I'm talking about when I say the words Caress of Steel. Because what I've got for you today is some really fun, a couple of fun things that I found in some newspapers. And one of them was actually news to me. Somehow I missed this over the years, and it's a Rush Rod Serling connection, which I know a lot of true Rush fans that are a step beyond me are going to go, of course, I always knew about this stuff. But I just discovered it. And I actually discovered it in a newspaper article from like 1975. And I want to read this to you because I think you're going to dig it. But the first thing I'm going to read to you is a review of the album Caress of Steel that was written in the Kingston Whig Standard, November 21st, 1975. So, of course, that was the year that Caress of Steel came out. Caress of Steel, for those of you that don't know, this is Rush's third studio album. There's a lot of people that thought that, especially the band, that thought this was the end, that this would be their last album. They wouldn't be able to go on past this. Things weren't going really well. And it's kind of interesting because the first album had Working Man. It did pretty well, had a different drummer. Second album, Fly By Night, comes out, has this, and I love, man, the song Fly By Night is still such a great tune. It was so good. But then they moved to this third album, and it's called Caress of Steel. And there's this story about, Rush was touring with Kiss, and there's this story that once Geddy went and played some of the songs from this upcoming album called Caress of Steel to Paul Stanley, who's of course in Kiss, and Paul Stanley, as legend has it, just did not get it. And a lot of people didn't get it. And it's pretty interesting because I look back at that era, and I'm too young to have lived, or I shouldn't say lived, but knew what was going on during that time. I'm just this little 3-4-year-old kid when all this stuff is happening. And so when I discovered Rush, that was in the Moving Pictures days. So a lot of us that are around my age, the first time we ever heard of them is we hear the song Tom Sawyer, and we're just instantly, what is this? This incredible music. And then you hear the rest of Moving Pictures, that album, and it's just everything on there is so cool. I mean, it's just amazing. Well, then, we become fans of Rush, and then you start going and you start digging through and finding all their other stuff, and you start hearing songs like Limelight and Spirit of Radio, and you just go, wow, these guys were just as good as it gets. I mean, this is amazing. You start going back and back through the catalog. Well, I remember, I think I saw it for the first time on a cassette tape, and I saw the cover for Caress of Steel. And it's bad enough on an album, but you see it on a cassette tape and you go, what, you see the side of the cassette and it says Rush, Caress of Steel. And then you look at the front of it and you can't even tell what you're looking at. It just looks like a mess. And the album cover itself, even on vinyl, when it's big, you just go, now, this might upset a lot of people, but I got to be honest with you. I think that, in my opinion, is just one of the worst album covers ever made, not just for them, just ever. It's a terrible album cover. And the reality of it is, folks, you don't have to like it, but album covers matter. They just do. At least back in the day. Today, it's not as big a deal because so much is visual. You got to have the music video, and the graphics are so much easier to get good stuff these days. But it was a terrible album cover. And as a matter of fact, it just made you question it. And I'll tell you, I was one of those kids that I would go to the record store with money burning a hole in my pocket. I just wanted to buy records. And I bought so many things simply because the album cover looked cool. And some of the things I bought were great and some of them were terrible. Talk to anybody that sells books. That cover of that book sells books. And like it or not, that album cover for Caress of Steel, in my opinion, might have been one of the things that killed it. Because the reality of it is, it had Lakeside Park on it. That was a great song. Bastille Day was a great song. I mean, these were not epic, these big, long, epic, progressive rock, things that go on for a half an hour. Those were really just great tunes. And you think, what was it that, in my opinion, and of course I didn't live at that time, or I wasn't paying attention during that time, but that matters, because later you go back, and I'm going back and buying the catalog, and I see, and it actually made me question, is that really them? Because you look at the first album, Rush, was actually kind of a cool cover. I mean, it's okay. Fly By Night was a really, really cool album cover. And then, what is this? And it wasn't even the right color that they wanted. They wanted it to be more of a silver color, and it ended up this weird gold. Anyway, it was just this ugly cover. And then 2112, it wasn't a great cover, but it was good. It was classy looking. And then you go on further, and they actually had some pretty cool album covers over the years. Permanent Waves was kind of a cool cover. Farewell to Kings was kind of a cool cover. And then you move on. Moving Pictures was a neat album cover. They had a lot of cool stuff, but that one. And I just wonder if that played a role. I'll tell you, there was one band that I was a huge fan of back in the 80s. I heard them on the radio, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And I went to the record store, and I saw the cover of the album, and I had a hard time buying it. Not talking about Rush, I'm talking about the band Riot. I had a hard time buying that record because it just looked so dumb. And maybe that's shallow, but there's a lot of people that react that way. Okay. Enough of that. You're going to love this though, because here's a review of the album Caress of Steel. And you're going to, if you're a Rush fan especially, you're going to get a huge kick out of this, because it's so, anyway, it's funny. It's just funny reading this. Rush, Caress of Steel, Mercury. This is Canada's self-designated heavy metal this is Canada's designated heavy metal kids have released a pile of noise with Caress of Steel. Obliterated by Geddy Lee's obnoxious vocals, the album is an earful of torture. The electric music is acceptable, but his voice is downright disgusting. It's a high-pitched chirp that screeches and screams in poor simulation of today's British rockers and sounds really cheap. There is, however, some justice to be found in much of the music. A lot of it is really fine. Lakeside Park could be a tremendous tune had someone else performed it. The Romancer, it's not what it's called, but is introduced as a short story by Rush, and again, is interesting musically, but Lee's voice destroys the entire effect of this trilogy. Their writing abilities should not be discounted, yet only when Rush move into acoustical guitar work do they garner respectability. Unfortunately, that segment is short-lived, past the Excedrin. That's so funny. And I got to be honest with you. I love Geddy Lee's voice. And early on, people were making, I think it even says it in this next thing I'm going to read to you. People were saying that he sounded like Robert Plant. I've never, you would have to have a very kind of shallow connection to Rush and Led Zeppelin to think that they sounded like each other, because they just don't. The only thing they have in common is they both sing in really high registers. And Robert Plant, in some cases, didn't. The closest you'd probably ever hear him sounding like Geddy Lee would be on the Immigrant Song. Because there's nothing else that Robert Plant ever did where tonally they sounded like each other. It would just been that comparison, like, wow, sometimes Robert Plant sings really high. And he kind of became known for that. And Geddy Lee just had that really, really high-pitched voice. I mean, when you hear him talking, you can tell that he's going to have this really high-pitched, super high tenor voice. I love his voice, though. I love Geddy Lee's singing. So anyway, that doesn't relate to me, or I don't relate to what that guy said, but it is funny listening to that, because so many people, especially in those early days, just discounted them completely because of Geddy's voice. I personally love listening to that guy sing. I've never heard a song that bothered me, but I've read other, if you've watched his channel, you've seen other things I've done on Rush where people have made similar comments. And I've never personally felt that way. Okay, this one's fun. This is Friday, October 10th, 1975. And this is The Rock Scene by Brian Dempsey. And again, this is something I didn't know. This was news to me. And I'm not, look, I have friends that are Rush fans that are way beyond me. I love Rush and I have a lot of their stuff. I've seen them in concert several times, but I'm not one of those guys that says I saw them 30 times on that tour. And there are people, and that's amazing because they're really into it, and they're listening when Neil Peart's playing Tom Sawyer to make sure that he gets all the hits, that everything's in there. And there are fans that are like that. I'm not that, but I know a lot about them, and I've followed them for years, and I love Rush. So this was new to me when I found this in this newspaper article. So this is the standard Friday, October 10th, 1975, page 6. Rush dedicates newest album to Rod Serling. Okay, here's the article. Who are Rush? A lot of people have been asking that question lately, largely as a result of their cross-Canada tour with Nazareth, which ended last Saturday, and their album Fly By Night. Okay, by the way, I'm curious if there are any Nazareth fans out there. I have about 6 or 7 Nazareth albums. Hair of the Dog's pretty cool, a few songs on there, but I'm not I don't know. I didn't love them. But I have a lot of their stuff. They have some cool things. And what's his name? I can't think of the singer. Great, crazy cool voice, the singer, though. It's one of the things I liked about them. Okay, Fly By Night. All that most people know about the band is that they won the Juno Award in 1970. It says won, but I think it got creased here because I think that was 1975. And had a single in Canada titled In the Mood, which made its way onto a K-Tel album. In the Brock University gym, the audience rises to its feet to welcome Rush, rocketing into new material from Caress of Steel. The spotlight focuses on lead guitarist Alex Lifeson, 22, of Toronto, gleaming in a chrome jacket, his silky blonde hair shining, knees bent, body stationary with twitching, contorted expressions. Alex concentrates all his energy in thrusting his fingers across the frets. Behind him, on the drum riser, Neil Peart, 23, from St. Catharines, pounds out the beat between gulps of wine, while Geddy Lee, 22, of Toronto, thunders out the bass line that underscores the speeding surge of the lead like a jackhammer busting concrete. Geddy rushes to the mic, screaming in a Zeppelinish manner while shifting his weight from leg to leg in time to the driving beat. But that's just glamour and 120 decibels. What about the music? Rush numbers are perhaps too long to hold the attention of their predominantly young audiences. Most obvious are the guitar and drum solos, which seem to be dragged out, scene-stealing, self-gratification. That's pretty funny. Their stuff can get a little ponderous. But that's one of the things a lot of people love about Rush, myself included. I mean, when you look at the overture on 2112, I know I've said this in previous videos, but how often do you really, with a rock band, because there's a lot of people that have put out instrumentals, and some of them are good, but it's pretty rare. How often do you look forward to an instrumental from a band? And again, Rush, the overture on 2112 is one of the greatest pieces of that entire thing, and you want to just sit and listen to it because it's so great. So that is one of the things people love about them, is the meandering musical parts of their songs. So anyway, scenes dragged out, scene-stealing, self-gratification. There are moments when a spectator can't help feeling the business end of the music has clouded the band's artistic judgment, but the group denies it. Our music is progressive rock, Neil explains, and every night we perform, we get psyched up easily because we really enjoy doing it. We want to make it by turning people onto us at concerts and through our albums, Geddy points out. That's more important than a number one hit single. That is exactly how their agent, ATI built acts like ZZ Top and Rory Gallagher. And it's interesting that he even says that that's more important than a number one hit single, because that became kind of an issue with them, especially during this tour on Caress of Steel, because they were getting some pressure from the record company like, hey, we need something more than what this ponderous stuff you're doing. Because you go look at Progressive Steel, and it is, it is that type of progressive rock that they're talking about here. With all the songs with movements in them and anyway. Okay, let's see. It's been a long haul for Rush members to get where they are today. Alex and Geddy have been working together as Rush for 7 years. They had John Rutsey on drums for the first album, but he split because he didn't like the musical direction the band was heading in. They auditioned drummers and eventually picked Neil Peart, who had played with Hush, J.R. Flood, Majority, and other area bands. We were in the States when we heard we won the Juno Award, and we were surprised, Alex admitted. It helped us get, scrolling to the top of the article, work in Canada, but not in the US, where the big market is. Rush's last album, Fly By Night, sold 110,000 copies and made the top 100 in Billboard. In Canada, the album is close to going gold, and it puts here 50,000 copies, which I don't know. Different countries have different levels to reach gold and platinum, and maybe that's Canada's is 50,000, which would make sense because their population is dramatically smaller, especially then, than the United States. Because in the United States it's 500,000 for gold, million for platinum. It rose to number one on the RPM and remained on that chart for 28 weeks. The band's new album, Caress of Steel, was just released last week, and from all indications looks more promising financially. And then it goes on with a quote from Geddy. We've been influenced by everyone who's good, Geddy says flatly. We're constantly being compared to Led Zeppelin, but that's only because my voice sounds like Robert Plant's. It's an unfortunate coincidence. And I don't think his voice sounds like Robert Plant's at all. In 1975, Led Zeppelin was well into their career at that point. They were, I guess, Physical Graffiti. Didn't that come out in 75? So they would have been, they were actually getting close to the end of their career at that point, not from a time standpoint, because they were still around for about 5 years after this, but they only had a couple albums out after this point. Anyway, I don't think they sound at all alike. And a lot of people make that comparison, especially in those early days. But again, it was just because the register. I don't think it had anything to do with the tonal quality. You would never mistake either one for the other. Okay. Protectively, Neil adds, we aren't following in Led Zeppelin's footsteps. One of the three-piece band's limitations is that Geddy, the lead singer, could be a much more effective vocalist if he was free to move unimpeded by his guitar. But Geddy disagrees, saying, I enjoy playing bass much more than singing. By the way, impeded by the guitar? How about impeded by the guitar, the bass, and the keyboards, and the Taurus bass pedals, and singing? I mean, he's... It's so funny because that's one of the things that's so charming and cool about Geddy Lee, that he's doing everything. I mean, it's like he must feel overworked if he's not doing all these different, he's really, everything that he's doing during a song, it's kind of incredible watching him perform. And it actually adds to the coolness of it, which I think is the opposite of what this person is saying. On stage, Rush performs an assortment of selected songs from all three albums. Neil, who writes all the lyrics, explained that FM stations were getting the most requests for Return of the Prince, part of the three of The Necromancer. Remember the last article called it The Romancer, a song from Caress of Steel. And therefore, it will probably be released as a single. Neil describes The Necromancer as a mythological sequel to Bytor from Fly By Night. That's from the album Fly By Night. And as a fantasy story, which is the embodiment of evil. The new album is dedicated to Rod Serling, and this is the part I didn't know when I read this. Geddy announced, because he was one of our great teachers, and at times the band tends to be very Rod-like. That's pretty fascinating. Rod Serling, if you don't know, is that he's the Twilight Zone guy. But Rod Serling is a fascinating guy. I mean, writer, I mean, you go kind of study him and his life. Dude, the guy, he is an interesting person, to say the least. Okay. They rarely speak of innovations in their music and seem at a loss to describe it. When asked how their music is evolving, Geddy responded, "It is getting a lot more emotional and better. We are striving for a distinctive sound, a niche in the rock scene." Rush will be going on a 2-month cross-America tour soon. It means plenty of traveling and lots of nights with only 3 hours of sleep. But for Rush, the American audiences are important. According to Neil, they've had some of their best receptions in Oregon and Washington. Underneath the band's volume is solid musicianship, and there's no denying that the intense hypnotic numbness of Rush's roar has found a young audience. But whether Rush is a fly-by-night group or a viable force depends on their success with the American audiences. And I don't remember where I saw this, but that tour, the Caress of Steel tour, they called it the Down the Tubes tour. I think that's what it was. And they really, I think I said this at the beginning of the video, but there was a real question if they were going to exist beyond that tour. And then, of course, they put 2112 out. And again, you go listen to them talk about this, and it was it surprised everybody really how well that album did, because the record companies were putting more and more pressure on them to put out some sort of a hit song or do something that would sell. And then instead they said, we're going to stick to our guns. We're going to do the stuff that we believe in. And then they put out the next album, which was 2112. And again, you just go watch interviews with them where they talk about this. It was a risk. At least they felt this was a real serious risk doing 2112. And once that thing was released and it took off the way it did, the record companies just didn't bother them, didn't question them anymore after that. And then, of course, you know the rest of the story. That's what's so fun about reading these things, is that we have the hindsight now. We can look back and go, well, what happened? Well, they ended up becoming one of the biggest and most important bands in the history of rock music. So much so that even when they were on their final tour, that R40 tour, I went to that thing, and they kind of did this reverse thing on the stage where they started in the modern time and they worked all their way back to that first album. And they filled an arena. There's just not many bands that can do that. They can go that far into their career and have that kind of an impact. And so many people over the years were impacted by this band. That at this moment, as we're reading these things about them, we're at a turning point where they just didn't even know if there really was a future. Anyway, I hope you enjoy these things. I love finding this stuff and talking about these periods of time when this stuff was happening, when all this stuff was developing. Anyway, please follow the channel, like the video, leave your comments. I'd love to hear if you saw them during this time, if you saw that tour. I know there were people. We have a lot of people in that age range that watch these videos that were at these tours. Please leave comments and let us know about that stuff. I find it absolutely fascinating reading what people have to say about all these stuff and about all these tours and these concerts and things you experienced. And what did you think of that album, Caress of Steel? Hey, thanks for taking time to watch this video. And as always, have yourself a fantastic day.